India's mineral discovery. It's a dream of independence that, well, faces some hard reality. The year 2024 brought what seemed like transformative news for India. In the latter months, the nation's Federal Ministry of Mines made an announcement that sent waves of excitement across the subcontinent. Geologists and exploration teams had identified substantial lithium deposits scattered across multiple regions, from the disputed territories of Jammu and Kashmir in the north to Karnataka's southwestern landscapes, and extending into several eastern provinces. The numbers were, honestly, staggering. In Jammu and Kashmir alone, preliminary assessments suggested lithium reserves approaching 5.9 million tons, a figure that, at least on paper, could reshape India's position in the global minerals market. Beyond lithium, surveyors reported discovering significant quantities of more than 10 additional critical minerals across these same territories. When India's media outlets picked up the story, they just couldn't contain their enthusiasm. Headlines blazed with nationalistic fervor, emphasizing a particular narrative. These discoveries represented India's golden ticket to breaking free from its reliance on Chinese mineral imports. The subtext was clear. Economic independence was finally within reach. The year 2024 brought what seemed like transformative news for India. In the latter months, the nation's Federal Ministry of Mines made an announcement that sent waves of excitement across the subcontinent. Geologists and exploration teams had identified substantial lithium deposits scattered across multiple regions, from the disputed territories of Jammu and Kashmir in the north to Karnataka's southwestern landscapes and extending into several eastern provinces. The numbers were staggering. In Jammu and Kashmir alone, preliminary assessments suggested lithium reserves approaching 5.9 million tons, a figure that, on paper, could reshape India's position in the global minerals market. Beyond lithium, surveyors reported discovering significant quantities of more than 10 additional critical minerals across these same territories. When India's media outlets picked up the story, they couldn't contain their enthusiasm. Headlines blazed with nationalistic fervor, emphasizing a particular narrative. These discoveries represented India's golden ticket to breaking free from its reliance on Chinese mineral imports. The subtext was clear. Economic independence was finally within reach. But reality has a way of, tempering even the most optimistic dreams. Almost immediately after the celebratory announcements, voices from India's own mining engineering community began raising uncomfortable questions. Their assessments painted a far more complex picture than the initial euphoria suggested. Yes, the minerals existed beneath Indian soil, but existence and extraction are two entirely different challenges. The engineers highlighted a fundamental problem. India currently lacks the indigenous capability to extract these resources on its own. Even in scenarios where international partnerships might enable extraction, the country's ore processing infrastructure remains woefully inadequate for the task ahead. Perhaps most concerning, among the newly discovered minerals, 6 require processing technologies that are, at present, monopolized by China. This revelation raises some pretty profound questions. Why is India so determined to reduce its mineral dependence on China? And why can't India, or for that matter, any nation besides China, easily access and process these critical resources? Before we dive deeper into this fascinating story of resources, geopolitics, and technological dominance, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel. By clicking that button, you'll ensure you never miss our in-depth analysis of the economic and political forces shaping our world. Now let's explore the real story behind India's mineral dilemma. The silent battle for critical minerals is honestly reshaping our world. We live in an age defined by technological transformation. The smartphones in our pockets, the electric vehicles on our roads, the solar panels on our rooftops, and the semiconductors powering our digital economy, all of these innovations share a common dependency. They require what experts call critical minerals. These aren't your grandfather's mining commodities. We're talking about lithium for batteries, rare earth elements for magnets and electronics, cobalt for energy storage, silicon for semiconductors, and dozens of other materials that form the invisible foundation of modern civilization. Across the globe, governments have awakened to a stark reality. Whoever controls the supply chains for these minerals doesn't just have economic leverage. They hold the keys to technological advancement and national security. This realization has triggered what some analysts call a quiet war for mineral supremacy. The United States has rolled out comprehensive strategies to secure its mineral supply chains. The European Union has designated critical raw materials as a strategic priority, launching initiatives to reduce import dependence. Japan, despite its limited natural resources, has aggressively pursued mineral security through international partnerships and technology investments. Australia, blessed with abundant mineral wealth, has positioned itself as a key alternative supplier to Western allies. India has watched these developments with growing concern. The country has aligned itself with the United States, Japan, Australia, and other nations in what some call a coordinated effort to desinify the international mineral supply chain. There's even been discussion of forming a mineral supply alliance, a sort of OPEC for critical materials, but designed to counter Chinese dominance rather than maximize profits. The urgency becomes clear when you examine India's import statistics. In 2023, India's purchases of 10 key minerals, including cobalt, nickel, lithium, and copper ore, reached an unprecedented $11 billion. Think about that figure for a moment. $11 billion spent on minerals that India desperately needs but cannot produce domestically. The dependency is even more extreme for specific materials. India's import reliance on cobalt, lithium, and nickel sits at 100%. Every single unit consumed comes from abroad. For copper ore, the dependency rate reaches 93%. But here's where the story takes an ironic twist. Among the 30 minerals that India has identified as critical to its economic development, a disproportionate share comes from the very country it seeks to distance itself from China. Consider bismuth, a metal crucial for pharmaceutical and chemical applications. Between 2019 and 2024, India imported approximately 35,000 tons of bismuth, with an astonishing 85.6%, originating from Chinese suppliers. Lithium tells a similar story. In 2023 alone, India purchased $25.53 million worth of lithium ore from China, representing 61.8% of its total lithium imports. Silicon ore? India bought 886,800 tons from China in a single year, dominating the import ledger. Natural graphite and flake graphite follow the same pattern. In 2023, China exported a total of 221,900 tons of natural graphite globally. India purchased 22,500 tons of that total, roughly 10.1%. For flake graphite, India ranks among China's largest customers. The data paints an unmistakable picture. India isn't just buying from China, it's deeply, structurally dependent on Chinese mineral exports for its economic functioning. Recognizing this vulnerability, India has attempted various strategies to break free. The Mineral Supply Alliance concept was supposed to provide alternative sources through coordinated procurement among like-minded nations. But progress has been disappointing. The alliance hasn't delivered the efficiency or supply security that proponents promised, forcing India to explore other options. This brings us back to the domestic discovery announcement. India's attempt to solve the problem at its source by finding and developing indigenous mineral reserves. To encourage this exploration boom, the Indian government implemented sweeping policy reforms. They relaxed regulatory restrictions that had previously constrained mineral exploration. In a particularly bold move, they allowed companies to conduct exploratory work without first securing a mining license, essentially giving the green light to prospect anywhere feasible. The results seemed promising at first. Exploration companies fanned out across the country, and within months, Indian media outlets were reporting major discoveries, substantial lithium deposits, and a diverse array of critical minerals spread across 5 different regions. The nation celebrated. Finally, self-sufficiency seemed achievable. But then came the sobering analysis from technical experts. Their message was blunt. These minerals cannot actually be extracted with India's current capabilities. How could such a disconnect exist between discovery and development? Let's examine what happened more closely. The harsh reality behind the headlines is sobering. At the end of 2024, when the Federal Ministry of Mines announced the comprehensive mineral finds, the details seemed almost too good to be true. Jammu and Kashmir held lithium reserves estimated at 5.9 million tons. Karnataka, Rajasthan, and Jharkhand harbored various other critical minerals in commercially significant quantities. Beyond lithium, more than a dozen additional valuable minerals had been identified. Indian media coverage reached a fever pitch. "The mines have been found," proclaimed one headline. "India will no longer need Chinese imports," declared another. The tone suggested not just hope, but certainty, as if the discovery itself guaranteed independence. For a brief moment, the nation basked in what felt like a windfall of geological fortune. Then reality reasserted itself. A prominent mining engineer, someone with decades of experience in India's extractive industries, published a detailed analysis that punctured the optimism. His assessment identified 2 fundamental obstacles that transformed the discovery from blessing to frustration. First, the extraction challenge. Finding minerals is only the beginning. Actually removing them from the earth requires sophisticated technology, substantial capital investment, and technical expertise that takes years to develop. Many of the newly identified deposits lie deep underground in complex geological formations. Reaching them demands advanced exploration techniques, specialized drilling equipment, and mining methodologies that India's domestic industry doesn't currently possess. Moreover, such projects carry enormous financial risk. Initial investments run into hundreds of millions of dollars before a single ton of ore reaches the surface. Without robust policy incentives, tax breaks, subsidized financing, regulatory guarantees, private companies have little motivation to shoulder these risks. And India's current policy framework, despite the recent reforms, doesn't provide sufficient assurance to attract the necessary private capital. The second problem is even more intractable: processing capacity. Let's use the Jammu and Kashmir lithium discovery as an example. 5.9 million tons sounds impressive, and it is in raw terms. But those lithium deposits exist in a particular geological context that requires specific extraction and refining techniques. India doesn't have the technological infrastructure or accumulated expertise to process lithium from these formations into battery-grade material that manufacturers actually need. Here's the real kicker. The engineer noted that if India genuinely wants to utilize these discoveries, the country will still need to rely on China's processing technology and refining capabilities. We've come full circle. India discovered domestic reserves specifically to escape Chinese dependence, only to learn that developing those reserves requires Chinese assistance. This paradox raises a deeper question. Why does China hold such overwhelming dominance in this sector? To understand why India, and honestly, most of the world, cannot easily sidestep China in the minerals sector, we need to appreciate the scope and depth of Chinese dominance. China isn't just a major player in critical minerals. It has constructed an unparalleled ecosystem that covers the entire value chain, from initial geological surveys all the way to final refined products ready for industrial use. The statistics really tell a story of comprehensive mastery. China has cataloged 173 distinct types of mineral resources within its borders. These break down into 13 energy minerals, 59 metal minerals, and 95 non-metallic minerals. The sheer diversity of this resource base gives China natural advantages, but resource endowment alone doesn't explain Chinese dominance. What really separates China is investment and strategic focus. The Chinese government and private sector have poured $19.4 billion into mining technology development, a figure that frankly dwarfs the combined investments of most other nations. This capital hasn't just improved extraction efficiency, it's funded breakthrough innovations in processing, refining, and environmental management that keep Chinese companies right at the technological frontier. The results, well, they speak for themselves. China has become the world's premier exporter of copper, lithium, gallium, germanium, graphite, and a whole host of other critical materials. But exports tell only part of the story. China's real advantage lies in its processing and refining capabilities, the stages that transform raw ore into usable industrial materials. This is where Chinese dominance becomes truly overwhelming. Consider these figures carefully. China controls 87% of global rare earth processing capacity. Rare earth elements are essential for everything from smartphone screens to wind turbine magnets to missile guidance systems. When China processes 87% of the world's supply, every nation, including the United States, Japan, and European powers, depends on Chinese facilities. China also handles 58% of the world's lithium refining. Lithium ore comes from various countries, including Australia, Chile, and Argentina. But most of that ore ships to China for refining into the high-purity lithium compounds that battery manufacturers require. China controls 68% of silicon processing globally. And silicon isn't just for semiconductors, it's essential for solar panels, which makes Chinese dominance in silicon processing a critical factor in the global transition to renewable energy. Let's examine specific minerals to really understand how deep this control runs. Take bismuth. This relatively obscure metal finds applications in pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and specialized alloys. Smelting bismuth requires precise temperature control and expertise in handling its unique properties. China controls 80% of global bismuth smelting capacity. For India to refine its own bismuth, even if Indian deposits were discovered, would require building entirely new facilities with technology that, honestly, doesn't exist outside China. Lithium presents an even starker picture. While lithium reserves exist in many countries, 58% of the world's refining capacity sits in China. Australia produces more lithium ore than any other nation, but most Australian lithium goes straight to Chinese refineries. Without Chinese processing, Australian lithium ore would be virtually worthless to battery manufacturers. Silicon really illustrates the problem with particular clarity. Manufacturing semiconductors and solar panels requires ultra-pure silicon, a material that demands sophisticated processing through multiple stages of refinement. China's industrial silicon production capacity and actual output represent 80.2% of the global total. This isn't just market leadership. It's market dominance so complete that competitors barely even register. Tellurium, used in solar power generation and thermoelectric devices, sees China accounting for 60% of global production. The market essentially has no viable alternatives to Chinese supply. Graphite is perhaps the most strategically significant example. This material is indispensable for electric vehicle batteries and also plays a crucial role in steel production. China controls 67.2% of the world's graphite production and processing. As electric vehicles proliferate globally, this Chinese dominance over graphite becomes a potential choke point for the entire automotive industry's transformation. For India, these global realities translate into acute vulnerability. According to India's own Ministry of Mines, 30 critical minerals are essential for the country's economic development and national security. Among these 30, 10 are entirely import-dependent. India produces none of them domestically. And for most of these 10, China is the dominant supplier. Looking at India's import data from 2019 to 2024 really reveals the extent of this dependence. Bismuth, 85.6% from China, lithium, 82% from China, silicon, 76% from China, titanium, 50.6% from China, tellurium, 48.8% from China, graphite, 42.4% from China. This isn't a recent development. India's critical mineral dependency has been building for decades. The root cause is straightforward. India prioritized meeting immediate demand through imports rather than investing in the long-term development of domestic exploration, extraction, and processing capabilities. This explains why industry analysts consistently conclude that India cannot realistically develop its newly discovered mineral reserves without Chinese assistance, at least not in the short to medium term. China holds the technology, the processing infrastructure, and the accumulated expertise that India lacks. But here's where politics complicates economics. India's relationship with China has been fraught for years, marked by border disputes, strategic competition, and mutual suspicion. Asking China for help in developing critical mineral capabilities runs counter to India's broader geopolitical strategy. So, India has attempted what might be called a multiple paths approach, trying several strategies simultaneously in hopes that one might succeed. India's government has been studying China's mineral sector development with intense interest, trying to identify lessons that might be adapted to Indian circumstances. If China could build world-leading capabilities from a relatively modest starting point several decades ago, why couldn't India follow a similar path? One area where India has attempted to learn from Chinese strategy is in battery manufacturing. Lithium-ion batteries are central to both electric vehicles and renewable energy storage. Rather than remaining dependent on imported batteries, India launched an ambitious production-linked incentive program worth 180 billion rupees. The goal: develop domestic advanced chemical battery manufacturing with 50 gigawatts of installed capacity within 5 years. On paper, the plan seems sound. Offer financial incentives to attract investment, build manufacturing capacity, create jobs, and reduce import dependency. A classic industrial policy playbook. But India may have underestimated just how complex mineral processing and battery manufacturing truly are. These aren't industries that emerge simply because a government offers subsidies. They require deep technical knowledge, supply chain integration, quality control systems, and manufacturing processes that take years to master. The gap between India and not just China, but also countries like the United States, remains substantial. American companies, despite enormous resources and advanced research capabilities, have struggled for decades to match Chinese mineral processing efficiency. If the United States, with its technological sophistication and massive capital markets, finds it difficult to compete with China in this space, India's challenges are proportionally greater. This isn't just speculation. Western nations recognized the risk of Chinese mineral dominance more than 20 years ago. They've invested billions trying to develop alternative processing capabilities, enhance their own extraction technologies, and reduce dependence on Chinese supply chains. Yet Chinese leadership in critical mineral processing has only strengthened over this period. What seemed like temporary Chinese advantage has hardened into structural dominance that proves remarkably difficult to disrupt. India's situation really exemplifies a broader global challenge. Discovering mineral deposits doesn't automatically translate into mineral security. The real question isn't whether resources exist beneath your territory. It's whether you possess the technological capability and industrial infrastructure to transform those resources into usable materials. For India, the answer remains sobering. Despite the excitement around domestic mineral discoveries, despite policy reforms designed to encourage exploration, despite ambitious plans for battery manufacturing, the fundamental reality persists. Achieving true independence from Chinese mineral supply chains will require not just years, but potentially decades of sustained investment, technology development, and industrial capacity building. India's mineral dilemma offers lessons that extend far beyond one country's resource strategy. The situation reveals how technological leadership in seemingly mundane industries, or processing, refining, materials science, can become a source of enormous geopolitical power. China didn't stumble into mineral dominance by accident. It resulted from deliberate policy choices made decades ago, sustained investment through multiple economic cycles, and strategic patience that allowed capabilities to compound over time. Chinese leaders recognized that controlling critical mineral supply chains would eventually translate into leverage over the technologies and industries of the future. That foresight is now paying dividends. As the world transitions toward electric vehicles, renewable energy, and advanced electronics, Chinese control over the materials that enable these transitions becomes increasingly consequential. For countries like India, this creates a painful bind. Economic development and technological advancement require access to critical minerals. But accessing those minerals means dealing with a geopolitical rival who holds near monopoly control over processing and refining. Even discovering domestic reserves doesn't resolve the problem when you lack the capability to develop them. The mineral supply alliance that India hoped might offer an alternative hasn't materialized as planned. Coordinating among multiple countries with different interests, regulatory frameworks, and industrial capabilities proves far more difficult than simply buying from established Chinese suppliers. This leaves India, and many other nations, facing uncomfortable choices. They can continue importing from China, accepting the strategic vulnerability that entails. They can attempt the long, expensive process of building indigenous capabilities, knowing that success is far from guaranteed. Or they can hope that technological breakthroughs might somehow reduce the importance of these minerals, though such breakthroughs remain speculative. None of these options offers an easy path forward. When India announced the discovery of vast lithium reserves and numerous other critical minerals in 2024, the initial response mixed hope with national pride. Here finally was a path toward resource independence, a way to break free from the constraints of foreign supply chains and chart an autonomous economic course. But as the technical realities became clear, that initial excitement gave way to a more complex understanding. The minerals exist, certainly. The reserves are real. But existence alone doesn't equal accessibility. Between the ore in the ground and the refined materials that industries need lies a technological and industrial gap that India cannot quickly bridge. The engineers who raised these concerns weren't being pessimistic. They were being realistic. Their analysis forced an uncomfortable but necessary reckoning with the scale of China's advantage in this crucial sector. This doesn't mean India should abandon its ambitions. Building domestic mineral processing capabilities remains a worthwhile long-term goal. The investments in exploration, the policy reforms to encourage development, the efforts to learn from international best practices, all of these make sense as part of a multi-decade strategy.